By the summer of 1978, I was 18 years old and living alone in my family home in Ohio. My mom and dad were going through a rough patch in their marriage. Dad was living in a hotel, and Mom had gone back to Wisconsin with my little brother. Our house was kind of isolated. It sat on about an acre of land, surrounded by forest and woodland in the suburbs of Akron. I'd often get real lonely. There was nobody else around, and the only company that I had was alcohol. Even though I was still 3 years shy of being able to buy alcohol legally, I was by now a seasoned drinker. I even drank booze while in school. I seem to recall a classmate once asking me why I was drinking gin at 10 o'clock in the morning. "It's my medicine," I told her. I didn't wake up on the morning of June 18th with murder in my heart, honest. But by the time the sun went down that evening, I would be a killer. I'd been having fantasies for some time about picking up a hitchhiker, bringing them back to my house, and exacting total control over them. You can imagine how excited I was then. When driving back from the mall, I spotted a young man about the same age as myself, thumbing a ride on the side of the road. He was a good-looking guy, and he was shirtless, which only made him even more attractive to me. By now, I had come to accept the fact that I was gay. I did my best to hide my sexuality from those around me. I didn't want to make my parents ashamed of me. I think most gay guys who saw the hitchhiker would have found him attractive. He had an incredible body. His chest was chiseled and well-defined. But unlike other gay guys, I couldn't help but wonder what the inside of his chest looked like. I didn't know it at the time, but I would soon find out. I pulled the car over, and the young man approached my window. He told me his name was Steven Hicks. When I asked him where he wanted to go, Steven told me that he had been trying to get to a concert, but it was too late now, so he just wanted to go home. He seemed like a real friendly sort of guy, the sort of person I'd want to have as a friend. I suggested to Steven that we could go back to my place and have a few beers. Then I'd bring him wherever he wanted to go. I was almost euphoric when Steven agreed to come back to my place to hang out. When we get back to my place, we crack open a few beers, and I offer him some pot that I have. But Steven says he just wants to drink. That's absolutely fine by me. We goof around for a while, listening to music, and Steven seems particularly interested in my dumbbell collection. Watching him lift the weights is incredibly arousing, but I do my best to make sure that he doesn't think I'm checking him out or anything. As inebriation starts to take hold of me, I think it's only a matter of time before I make a pass at Steven. But then he starts talking about girls. Maybe it was his way of letting me know that he's not gay. I guess I was a little disappointed, but Steven being straight wasn't that much of a big deal to me. I know it might sound a little corny, but it's almost like my wildest fantasies have come true. I have a friend, a companion, and that's all that really matters. The loneliness that had become all-consuming has suddenly been shattered, and I wish that I could stay like this forever. But time stands still for no man. Eventually, the day grows long, and Steven tells me that he has to hit the road. Apparently, it's his father's birthday. Remember, I've already promised to give him a ride home. What I really want is for Steven to ask me if he can move in. That's absurd, I know. I just met this guy a few hours ago, but all I've been able to think about since we got back to my place is the idea that he will stay forever. And I mean forever. The idea of being all alone once more fills me with a sense of dread that is almost impossible to describe. I tell Steven that I'm just going to have one more beer and then we'll hit the road. Instead, I hit him over the back of the head with the bar of one of my dumbbells. Steven slumped to the ground. He was already out cold, I think. But I hit him a second time just to make sure. There was no going back now. I proceeded to strangle Steven to death with the bar from the dumbbell. Now he can't leave. Steven Hicks is mine. I have total control over him. Lust and the need for control. These two things turned me into a killer. I proceeded to take off Steven's clothes. Later that evening, the gravity of what I had done started to sink in. The reality of the situation now outweighed the fantasy. I wished that I could turn the clock back to when I first saw Steven standing on the side of the road. I would have just kept driving. He'd still be alive, and I wouldn't be in this predicament. Self-preservation was now the name of the game. After darkness fell, I dragged Steven's body outside and hid it under the crawl space of the house. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was terrified that one or both of my parents would come home and find out what I had done, but they never did. When I got up the next morning, I was still all alone. I went out and bought a large hunting knife. Then I cut up Steven's body and stuffed the parts inside 3 trash bags. After burning his clothes, I wondered how I would go about disposing of his remains. I knew of a ravine a few miles away and figured that it was as good a place as any. So late at night I placed the trash bags in the rear of my father's car and set off. It must have been around 3 in the morning. The roads were empty for the most part. I was terrified that at any moment a police car would pull up behind me with its sirens on. Then, that's exactly what happened. For a split second, I thought about flooring it. But I've seen enough police car chase shows to know that the perp seldom gets away. I pulled over to the side of the road and in the rearview mirror saw the policeman walking towards my car. Once the cop saw that I was just a kid, he'd want to know what I was doing out so late, where I was coming from and where I was going. I reckoned that I had about 7 seconds to come up with a good excuse. There was a tap at the window. I rolled down the window. The cop tells me that I was crossing the yellow lines in the middle of the road and asks me if I've been drinking tonight. I tell him no. I can't remember when my last drink was. It might have been 6 hours ago, or it could have been 6 minutes ago. We talk a little. He asks me for my name and whether or not I own the car. I tell him it's my father's. "What are you doing out so late?" the cop asks me. "My parents are getting a divorce and I can't sleep. I just decided to go for a drive to clear my head," I tell him. For some reason, the cop calls for backup and another cruiser arrives on the scene. If these guys decide to arrest me, my life is over. Not because of the DUI charge, but because there are several trash bags in the rear seat containing an assortment of human limbs, bones, and organs. Somehow, I passed the damn sobriety test, but I'm not out of the woods yet. The cop who initially pulled me over suddenly shines his flashlight over the trash bags. "What are those?" he asks. Is all I can say at first. "It's just trash. The dump is open all night, and I can't sleep, so I just figured I would do it now," I tell the cop. Part of me thinks that he'll never buy this. Who the hell goes to the dump at 3 in the morning? But then again, what is more likely? Somebody going to the dump at a silly time of the morning, or an 18-year-old kid driving around with trash bags containing human remains? The cops bid me farewell and drive off into the night. For a moment, I think about making my way to the ravine and disposing of the bags as I had initially planned. But I'm just too spooked. If I cross paths with either of those 2 cops again, they're probably going to get suspicious. So I just drive home instead, still struggling to understand how I survived my encounter with the police. I placed the trash bags back under the crawl space, but not before rummaging around until I found Steven Hicks' severed head. I took that to bed with me. My close brush with the law deterred me from venturing too far from the house with Steven's remains, but I still had to get rid of the trash bags. Ultimately, I dug a shallow grave in my backyard, tossed the bags inside, filled in the hole, and did my best to forget about Steven Hicks. But no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't get Steven Hicks out of my mind. A few weeks after my first attempt to dispose of Steven's remains, I dug up the trash bags and took them inside the house. Obviously, the smell was absolutely revolting. I used some acid to pare the flesh from Steven's bones. I then flushed the resulting slurry-like substance down the toilet. Now all I had to do was find a way to get rid of Steven's bones. Of course, I couldn't just flush them down the toilet, so instead, I walked out to the woods behind my house and, using a sledgehammer, crushed Steven's bones into dust and scattered them into the wind. Just think about this from poor Steven Hicks's point of view for a moment. One minute he's standing on the side of a lonely road, thumbing a ride. Then he's in my house, listening to some music and having a few beers. Not long after that, he's a bundle of flesh, bones, and organs spread out over several trash bags under my house. Nobody deserves that. In the weeks after Steven's murder, I got drunk every single day. Then, one day, my father landed home, with a new fiancée nonetheless. He was furious when he found out that my mom had gone to Wisconsin with my kid brother. He was also worried about the amount of drinking I'd been doing, and even went so far as to enroll me in an Alcoholics Anonymous program. Alcohol abuse would be a defining feature of my life, though, for many years to come. At this point in my life, I now had two big secrets to hide from the world: my sexuality and the fact that I was a murderer. I would try to move on with my life. I decided that Steven Hicks would be my first and final kill, but ultimately I would go on to become one of the most notorious serial killers of the 20th century. But that's a story for another day.